So welcome, everybody. My name is Margaret Fisher. I am the outreach coordinator for the Plant Nova Natives campaign and also the Plant Nova Trees campaign, which is part of Plant Nova Natives. And with me today is Melinda Soltis, who's going to be helping in the background and monitoring the chat. The plan is for me to go through this talk with and then get questions at the end. So if you have questions that you want to put in the chat, Melinda will read them out at the end, or you could just wait to the end and unmute. So Plant Nova Natives is a group effort by over 100 organizations in Northern Virginia, all working together to promote the use of native plants in the landscape. There's also hundreds, thousands of individuals working on this project. Well, hundreds anyway, at least. So it's become very popular recently. There we go. The talk today is an overview. It's kind of a whirlwind tour. There's so much more to say on any one of these subjects. This will take 35, 40 minutes, and there'll be plenty of time for questions. The purpose of this session is to introduce you to the numerous ways in which property and community managers can adapt their landscaping practices to promote human health and safety and to support the natural ecosystem upon which our own welfare depends. So as you listen to this smorgasbord of options, I suggest that you make a mental note of those that might be suitable for your own situation or that capture your interest, and then you can learn more details on our page for property and community managers on the Plant Nova Trees website. So as a society, we have always expected our landscaping to support our needs for beauty and a place to rest or play. And in recent years, flood control and heat mitigation have been added to our requirements. But now we understand that some of the plants and landscaping practices that have been commonly used up to now end up damaging the places we are trying to enhance and negatively impacting human health and safety and welfare. But fortunately, there are alternatives now available that offer the opportunity to meet all our aesthetic and other goals without causing the harm. Some of these practices could actually save you money. Others might require new expenditures. You can pick what meets your goal and your budget. Any change you make in the landscaping must take into account the practicalities. Is it cost effective? Most of these landscape practices can be gradually introduced in a cost-neutral manner. Others might cost you more than you currently spend, but possibly be offset by other savings, or in any event, add important value for your clients. Do the landscaping maintenance needs match the skills of the workers? You probably aren't working for suggestions that would require extensive retraining of your workers or finding a new contractor. You'll want to consider the capabilities of your current workforce. So we'll start with flooding. We all recognize the benefits of lawns. They make strong walking and playing surfaces. They look nice. They have open sight lines. Turf grass grows fast to stabilize soil after a disturbance. And if all you're doing is mowing it, and you only need it to be green, it's very easy to care for. Although, of course, for playing fields, you need a lot more work and a lot more input. But if we devote most of our open space to lawn, we're missing important opportunities. Lawns do a poor job of controlling stormwater because the soil is generally quite compacted. Other plants are much more effective at capturing and cleaning runoff before it hits the storm sewers. Virginia is under a mandate under the Chesapeake Bay regulations to reduce runoff, because when large volumes of water coming off of impervious surfaces hit the streams, they cause downstream flooding, and they scour the stream beds, sending sediment and pollutants down to the bay, where they create dead zones and ruin the underwater ecosystem and the economies that depend on it. This picture also illustrates another opportunity, which is to increase worker safety by not having them mow on steep slopes where an empty lawn serves no purpose. A bank of native Virginia shrubs would be a simple alternative here. This is an example of using landscaping to capture stormwater. Planting beds with native species can be positioned to catch the water before it hits the storm drains. It makes sense to retain lawn where it actually serves a function, such as in this property, where it provides a safe place for the children to run in circles around the church building. Trees provide the best stormwater capture of all. This is why the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality mandated the planting of millions more trees by 2025. We have not reached those goals, but we're all still trying. Another thing to think about is human health. And you can increase human health by preserving and increasing native tree canopy. Physical and mental health are better in areas with more trees. Providing access to nature also improves human health. For example, studies have shown that being in nature lowers the blood pressure. Children living in areas with more trees have less asthma, and tree-lined streets encourage people to walk more. The cooling effect of trees is significant and of major importance to avoid heat-related illness in our warming world. A 5-degree difference during heat waves can make a life and death difference. Additional benefits of trees include that they may lower your AC costs if you place the trees strategically. They can lower costs as much as 30%. In parking lots, you'll notice everyone tries to park under the trees. Trees also can provide windbreaks and reduce heating costs in the winter. And of course, they're beautiful, and they provide a buffer between properties, both a visual and a sound barrier. There is an unfortunate tendency to not replace trees when they die, or to replace them with short ornamental trees. Some neighborhoods are becoming progressively denuded of their shade. Does your community have a plan to continually renew its trees? You want to plan ahead for something that takes decades to reach full height. It's best to get the new trees started before the old one dies. Another opportunity for all of us is to try to protect the ecosystem. And that means providing food and shelter and nesting areas for the songbirds and the fireflies and everyone else. They really need it if they're going to survive. The decline in Northern Virginia's bird population is just one example. Why do we keep mentioning native plants? Why plant Nova natives? Locally native plants are the best choice to support the ecosystem. Most plant-eating insects can only eat the plants with which they evolved. Without insects such as caterpillars, we would have no birds, since almost all baby songbirds can only eat caterpillars and other invertebrates. In addition, the adult birds require insects for their protein, and native bees depend on native plants for most of their food sources. Therefore, if you don't have native plants, we'll lose the birds as well as the other insect eaters, such as frogs and dragonflies, plus all the other critters that eat them. Ultimately, a collapse of the ecosystem will also do us in. It's been shown that to support breeding bird populations in a community, at least 70% of the biomass, which primarily would be in the form of trees, at least 70% in an area must be locally native plants. And that 70% number is a bare minimum. We know that that's enough to support chickadees. We don't know that it's enough to support all the other birds. But we do know that the higher the percentage, the more benefits to the ecosystem. By contrast, non-native plants do little to support the ecosystem, and some commonly used landscaping plants actively damage it. The definition of an invasive plant according to the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, is that invasive plants are species intentionally or accidentally introduced by human activity into a region in which they did not evolve and cause harm to natural resources, economic activity, or humans. So if you are using non-native plants, please choose ones that are not invasive. Some examples of not invasive plants would be Japanese azaleas and hybrid rhododendrons and zinnias, other annuals, most other annuals, I should say. But you still should be careful because a plant may seem harmless now, but it can take decades before some introduced plants suddenly turn invasive. It's also a missed opportunity to use a plant that when you could have used a plant that will actively benefit the ecosystem. The most ubiquitous non-native plant of all in our landscape is turfgrass. Even if it has a name such as Kentucky bluegrass, it still comes from Europe. It has, lawn has its benefits for sure, but at best, it does nothing to support the ecosystem, and at worst, it actively damages it. The term invasives is used specifically for plants that are known to be causing damage in Virginia, and that damage is huge. These plants left their control mechanisms and the natural balance of their original ecosystems behind when they were introduced here, and therefore they grow without check. The birds eat their seeds or berries and carry them into our natural areas. It also works the other way around. Invasives in your natural areas that you let go to seed can invade your lawns and landscaped areas. So why would you want to plant or keep a plant that is causing economic or environmental harm? Native alternatives are available for almost every situation. How do you know what's invasive, what isn't? The Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation maintains an invasive species list. It is only updated periodically, so if you're not quite sure, it's good to Google it and find out about a particular species. These species are costing Virginia landowners and taxpayers millions and millions of dollars a year to control. There's now a law in Virginia that if a professional landscaper or any professional person is proposing to install an invasive species on someone else's property, they must warn them ahead of time about the problem. And another law was just passed that will require garden centers to put up a sign next to invasive plants identifying them as such. That's not going to take effect for another year and a half, I believe. The most visible demonstration of the invasive problem is the common sight of trees that are being killed by introduced vines. Examples of this are Asian wisteria, English ivy, and half a dozen others. The wisteria is blooming right now. Wherever you see it crawling up the trees, those are trees that are going to die, unless you do something about it. There are also tree species that are invasive. The Bradford or Callery pear is the most notorious example, having taken over everywhere. It's also a poor tree for the landscape and very prone to breakage. So although it's still for sale, most people are not planting it anymore. Invasive shrubs can also take over and ruin our natural areas and are doing so in a big way. Many of our parks, for instance, are impassable now because of multiflora rows. All the photos here are shrubs that are commonly used in the landscaping and that had escaped into natural areas. I took all these pictures out in a natural area. These dense infestations provide shelter for ticks and increase the risk of Lyme disease. There are grasses that are invasive as well. Chinese silvergrass and fountain grass have been popular among landscapers. You often see them planted at the entranceway to homeowners associations, and unfortunately, they escape and go all over. In this picture, the HOA landscaping is across the street. This is where it escaped to. Running bamboo is actually technically a grass, and some counties, including Fairfax and Loudoun, require it to be kept on your own property. Many of the ground covers that we use are invasive. The reason people plant these plants to begin with is specifically because they want them to take over quickly. But unfortunately, they keep going and will escape and smother the forest floor. In addition, English ivy makes a good breeding ground for mosquitoes, and it's also a tree killer. The other examples include Japanese pachysandra, and liriope, vinca, and yellow archangel. You'll be glad to hear there are not a lot of invasive perennials for sale. There are a lot of invasive perennials, but they're not typically garden plants. Orange daylily is one example of an invasive perennial. You may also be interested to know that most garden weeds, common garden weeds, are invasive non-native plants. When people talk about natives as being weedy, it's usually because they don't know what's native. So how do you know what plants you already have in your landscaping? You can ask the extension master gardeners. They have plant clinics. You can take a piece of the plant or a picture to them. They have a hotline. There are also volunteer organizations that will send people out to your location to help you figure this out. Examples would be the Wildlife Sanctuary Program of the Northern Virginia Bird Alliance and the local tree stewards. You can also use plant identification apps. I would say they're accurate maybe 2/3 or 3/4 of the time, but they can give you a good place to start. There's several popular ones, such as Leaf Snap and Picture This. The most accurate one would be iNaturalist, because it lists more than one possibility instead of just guessing one. Luckily, there are plenty of native alternatives for sale that can provide the same effect as the invasive plants. There are around 50 species of native trees available for sale. Almost any of them will thrive in an average yard, although the big exception is wet soil, which requires specific plants that tolerate that. You want to try to plant a diversity and not the same red maple over and over. When diseases or other stressors hit, diversity prevents an entire street from losing all its trees at once. Don't forget what happened when Dutch elm disease hit our towns. If you need advice about what to plant, we have an electronic hotline, so to speak, to help people choose the right species. Understory trees are very popular, and smaller trees are appropriate for areas that have less room for canopy trees. For example, you cannot grow a big shade tree on a small parking lot island. You can try, but it won't survive. Its growth will be stunted and it will probably die after 20 years or so. So some examples of nice native understory trees are flowering dogwood and redbud, but there are many more that people are not familiar with. However, shrubs and some small trees paradoxically take up more space in a small yard than a canopy tree would, because of the branches, which are at the level where we walk. So what we actually need in a small, well, what we need in generally is more canopy trees. And even when they're full grown, they're only a few feet wide and take up less space in your small yard. There's a very unfortunate tendency to not replace those trees when they die, or to replace them with the short ornamentals. Not every site is appropriate for every tree, or for any tree. Overhead power lines and underground utilities need to be avoided. You want to call Miss Utility before you dig any project. This poor tree in the picture should not have been planted under a power line and had to be mangled. If you already have a tree with branches near a power line, you should always call the power company before you do any work on it. On the other end of the spectrum, you may have areas that would be perfect for reforesting. An example would be an area next to a parking lot that was created during the construction process and then seeded with turf grass simply to keep the dirt from washing away. Adding trees there where no one is likely to use the lawn and where there is plenty of room for their roots will add shade to your property and give you one less area to mow once they fill in. And I should add, you can get trees for like $3 a piece. It's very inexpensive to plant trees and reforest. The only real expense can be in deer protection where you have to put up a wire fence of some sort. But even so, it's still way less expensive than you might guess to reforest. Shrubs are the landscaper's mainstay. Native shrubs come in many different sizes and shapes.
4 p.m.
Somebody needs to mute.
It's turned on.
All right, whoever is making noise, please mute yourself. Most native shrubs have attractive flowers in the spring or summer, and many provide vivid fall foliage or berries for winter interest. So some examples are winterberry and Virginia sweetspire, and there are many more. There are also some very lovely native ornamental grasses that you can use instead of that Chinese silvergrass. Native grasses fill space nicely, and they have a very low maintenance requirement. They're most beautiful when left standing all winter and not cut back until early spring. This is pink muley grass, which is particularly striking as long as you have good drainage. Just to warn you, it has to have good drainage. And there are several other grass choices available in conventional garden centers. Ground covers are a good thing to put under trees because they protect the trees from lawnmowers, string trimmers, and soil compaction. So options in the native realm include native sedges, which is what's shown here, and ferns, and about 30 other native species. For most of those other species that act like ground covers, you probably would need a specialty garden center or order them online. Using native flowers in your landscape means using perennials, not annuals. Most lawn and landscaping companies have experience working with annuals. They clear out all the plant material from a bed and start over 2 or 3 times a year. But perennials are seldom managed that way, unless you want to spend a lot of money, waste a lot of money. A big advantage is that they only need to be planted once, and then they come up again every year for many years. The downside is that they then need to be weeded. Less weeding is needed in shade, but in sunny areas, it might be needed once or twice a month in the growing season. If your company is not up for that, you may not want to use perennials. To make it easier for the crew to know what's a weed and what isn't when the plants are not in bloom, in an institutional setting, it's best to limit the number of perennial species or avoid them altogether if you need to. So one way to use them and have flowers in your landscape is to put them in containers, which are very easy to manage. There is one important issue with them, and that is that they will need to be watered regularly in hot weather. Now let's talk about maintenance. It is different for native plants than some non-natives. Native plants should not be fertilized. It's actually not good for them. They don't require soil amendments unless you're talking about construction dirt that was stripped of its topsoil, in which case you would add some compost on the top. In the case of natives, the advice is to pick the plants that match the soil conditions and not try to change the conditions to match the plants. Many plants in Virginia thrive in hard clay soil because that's what they're used to. You only need to water until the plant has established, and then you should stop. By established, it means that the roots have grown out into the soil, which you can tell by tugging on the stem a little bit. And finally, you don't want to use insecticides on your native plants. That would completely defeat the purpose of choosing a native plant. As in any garden, you don't want to leave bare ground. It's just an invitation for weeds. An organic mulch protects the soil from compaction and erosion and heat and drying out. But the best thing for native plants and for the ecosystem is to use the added mulch only initially until the plants fill in and themselves create a living soil protector. Wherever possible, please leave the leaves to be your natural mulch and to allow the fireflies and butterflies, etc., to live. You won't want leaves on your sidewalks, but moderate amounts are fine under trees and in gardens. When we remove the leaves or chop them up, we're killing the young forms of butterflies and other beings that overwinter there. Dead leaves will not harm your native plants, which will grow up right between them in the spring, assuming you haven't added a really thick pile of leaves on top of what falls there naturally. Try to replace invasive species as quickly as your budget allows. The prices of natives are comparable to those of other plants. The Extension Master Gardeners websites have numerous resources on native plant choices, including web pages and videos. As is the case with any plant, you need to choose plants that are suitable for the specific growing conditions, such as sunlight, moisture, and soil type. There are native plant guides for almost all the Virginia regions. There are over 280 garden-worthy, locally native plants available for sale. Now let's talk about your woodlands. Woodlands are an amenity. They're often ignored. We are steadily losing our woodland buffers between properties, which provide beauty and a place to enjoy nature, and which block undesirable views and reduce flooding. These remnants of our forest are often the only remaining habitat for birds in the neighborhood. In addition, vegetated screenings between properties are often mandated in the building process, and if so, the law then requires you to maintain the plantings long term. So how do you go about woodland management? The first step is to assess the current condition. Are invasive vines threatening the trees? What other invasive plants predominate? This area looks neglected and can invite undesirable behavior like dumping, after-hours drinking, drug dealing, and other illegal activities. Are the lower layers present, including native shrubs and tree seedlings? Urban foresters, professional naturalists, tree stewards, master naturalists, Northern Virginia Bird Association ambassadors, they're all available to help if needed for free. And the plant ID apps are pretty good, but you don't want to rely on them entirely. Other threats to your woods include trash and dumping, soil compaction, land disturbance, erosion, invasive insects and tree diseases, and silt from uphill construction. Once you have an idea of what's going on in your buffer area, the next step is to define your goals for the property, such as being a buffer, or a place to walk in nature, or just a home for the birds. And the first step after that is to figure out how you're going to manage the invasive non-native plants. You're going to need to prioritize. Generally, the recommendation is to start from the top down. Save the trees from invasive vines and from other invasive trees. Invasive non-native vines are killing our trees by the millions. Remove invasive shrubs, and then work on the lower levels. But the exception is that your plan should also include early detection of new invasives to take them out before they become established. Some really bad invasives should be addressed as soon as you can. An example is lesser celandine, seen here, which will ruin your woodland floor. Everywhere you see that, it looks pretty for about a week, but all the bluebells, all the other natural growth on the floor of the forest is eradicated by this plant. Tree of heaven is another sign of neglect, and it's the host plant for spotted lanternfly, which can cause severe damage to many species of plants, and has, as you know, caused major economic damage further north. And now we have it in Virginia. So how do you deal with the invasive plants? In every case, you should identify the plant species first, and read up about which of the many removal methods will work for that species. Blue Ridge Prism is an awesome source of that information, and I will be sending out all these resources to you. Obviously, it costs money to control invasive species, but can you afford not to? Leaving your trees to die not only will significantly lower property values, but also leads to potentially hazardous trees and expensive tree removal services. If you simply cut the invasive vines at the base of trees, that will rescue the trees temporarily. The sooner you do this, the better. Volunteers could do this work, and we have instructions on the Plant Nova Trees website. The vines will regrow, though, until you take care of the roots. Try not to cut the native vines. Their berries are an important food source for migrating and local birds. That's also true for poison ivy, by the way, which is a native plant. Obviously, you're going to want to eliminate it where you have children playing, but wherever you can leave it in the natural areas, it will benefit the ecosystem. Uprooting the species may work for some species and may be suitable work for volunteers, but that doesn't work for plants that regrow from small pieces left behind. Well, I should say, unless you can come back and keep pulling it. And the soil disturbance caused by uprooting causes the seeds of more invasives to germinate. Simply chopping down some invasive species can make the situation worse, as they may react to that stress by putting up 100 suckers. Tree of Heaven is a classic example of that. Please don't just cut down Tree of Heaven. You have to take care of the roots and essentially kill the plant before you do that. So, unfortunately, herbicides are often the only effective choice available, and they can be used safely. The application method depends on the species. Anyone being paid to do this work must be a certified pesticide applicator. Can you enlist your maintenance company? We have training available for them. There are also companies that specialize in invasives control. All of us need clean water and healthy soil, and chemicals, by the way, can damage the soil and its inhabitants. We need a safe environment for humans and wildlife. So please minimize chemical and winter salt use. When they're needed, you want to use them properly and read the instructions carefully. Usually people are putting down too much, thinking that more is better, which it actually isn't. So to give some examples, winter salt is getting into our drinking water and cannot be removed by the water treatment plants. The local water authorities are working hard to find alternatives for road salt. Landowners need to be very careful about what they apply to the walks and how much. It's very important to carefully follow instructions for the quantity of products that you use on your lawn, and try and keep it off the sidewalks. Insecticides are hugely problematic. What people don't realize is that products that kill adult mosquitoes will also kill all the other insects, including the bees and the lady beetles and the dragonflies, etc. Even if that chemical was labeled as, quote, safe or, quote, natural, worse still, the class of insecticides known as systemics or neonics permeate the tissues of plants and turn them into poison for any caterpillar that eats their leaves, or for any butterfly that sips the nectar, or for any bee that gathers the pollen. The Public Health Department monitors for mosquito-borne disease and will advise when there's a need for broadcast spraying. Otherwise, there are much more effective ways to control mosquitoes, starting with seeking out and eliminating pockets of standing water. There are many other recommendations that don't involve insecticides and can be easily found online. Similarly, spraying chemicals that kill ticks is equally problematic. There are many ways to protect against ticks. In the landscape, that includes providing wide paths or play spaces, which could be closely clipped lawn, so people are not brushing up against tall plants. A form of pollution we don't think about so much is the one caused by gas-powered leaf blowers or gas-powered machines in general. The gas-powered leaf blowers are tremendously polluting both of hydrocarbons and dust. They can create up to 110 decibels of noise, which can damage the user's ears and, of course, annoy the neighborhood. They're actually now banned in DC. Electric leaf blowers are getting better, but they're still less powerful and have a harder time dealing with large piles of matted leaves. They usually are strong enough to handle dry leaves on walks and streets. Many companies have both kinds of leaf blowers, and you can specify what they should be using in the contract. Leaves under the trees and in shrub or flower borders can just be left in place in most locations, and that's what's ideal for the ecosystem. Leaves along the lawn can be mulched in place by the mower. They disappear quickly and help feed the soil. Some leaves don't even need to be chopped up to disappear from the lawn by spring. So the red maple leaves are an example of that. This is actually a photo of my son's yard. We did a little experiment. This is red maple leaves all over it. And by spring, they had melted away. So I had just mowed one line to see if having it mowed would make them disappear faster. But we couldn't tell the difference in the spring. They were all gone anyway. That, of course, is not true for oak leaves, so it depends on the species. But any leaves can be mulched in place. And one last form of pollution to think about is light pollution. Light at night affects human sleep cycles, and it's also a threat to insects, birds, and even to plants, we're finding. So please put your lights on motion detectors wherever you can, and choose lighting products that are certified to minimize light trespass and glare and sky glow. That was kind of a lot, so I'd like to just hope that you may remember these 4 things if you don't remember anything else. One is you can get help for free. Second is please get rid of the invasive plants. The third is please don't spray for mosquitoes and ticks. It's an ecological disaster that so many people are doing that. You can find lots of more information and resources on the Plant Over Trees website on the page specifically for property managers. So thank you all for your attention. I'm happy to take questions, and I will stop sharing, and Melinda will let us know what questions we might have.
Okay, don't have any in the chat now.
Okay,
I have a question.
yes.
So this is Jill Joyce. I'm out in the Regency Homeowners Association, and I am a native plant planter as much as possible. But I want to just ask you something. There is something going around, and it's called, what is this thing called? It's a severe wilt and dieback of redbud and dogwood, particularly, and some maples, actually. Are you familiar with this at all?
I am. My understanding is that it's a big problem for the growers.
It's vascular streak dieback is what it's called, now that I've scrolled through the article sufficiently. So that's a problem, and there is no treatment for it
Yes,
at this point.
I don't believe it's affecting the trees that are out there already so far.
It killed my redbud,
Oh,
my
sorry.
4-year-old redbud.
I'm sorry.
Oh, there's Liz. Hi, Liz. So for someone who is as some of the people on this chat could say, I mean, my yard, I plant as many perennials and natives as I can. But I just got forced into basically buying a cherry tree as a replacement because I don't have $1,000 to lay down every 4 years. If I do a dogwood or a redbud or something. So I'm just concerned that we're going to, with some of these strange things that are going around, it's going to have an impact on our ability. I was heartbroken to not be able to choose another redbud or a dogwood.
Yeah, I don't think I mean, if it happened in your yard, I would think putting another one in would be a bad idea because maybe it's in the soil or something.
Yeah.
But there are, by the way, I mentioned those two because they're popular. There are several other beautiful understory trees that are native that could be used.
We,
But
yeah, our front yard has to be a flowering spring.
there are examples of that, like the fringe tree, for example. But
Actually, the fringes are experiencing it too, because those are my go-tos.
no, I'm sorry.
Yeah, because I actually fought for, we put in over 200 flowering trees several years ago that I fought for. Um, I didn't know if you had any other insight, but this is becoming a problem, this vascular streak dieback. So, okay, thank
One of
you.
many, many, many threats to our trees.
I know.
The red maple actually seems to be doing pretty well so far, but we actually have too many of them. It's a little problematic in terms of diversity. But a lot of the other species of trees, in general, are having a big struggle. Kenneth? Oh, you're on mute, Kenneth.
Okay. You had photos, I think, of lesser celandine,
Yeah,
which it's a green leafy plant that has yellow flowers in the spring,
that's correct.
and it's showing up in the Newington Forest Community Association area. And I reported it to the elementary school that had it on their property. But I was wondering, does Fairfax County have any, I'm going to call it organization, that will come out and try to kill or stop this stuff? Because now I'm starting to see it all through the woods in our area, not to mention people's lawns.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you asked because as it happens, we actually are trying to figure out how to handle that and similar problems right now. But we actually just started a new organization specific to Fairfax County to try and look at the entire county, private, public land, all lands, and see how can we get a grip on this problem as a community. I mean, any individual landowner can do their best on their property and will need to. But that's so far been a losing proposition. So how are we going to do it? And we're thinking about where you could get the resources, volunteers, paid workforce, develop the workforce, get neighborhoods to adopt their neighboring park or adopt their school, get corporations to adopt the parks. Some of this requires money, and lesser celandine is a really good example of that because you're not going to be able to dig that out. It's going to have to be treated with herbicide. So that doesn't answer your immediate problem, but we very much welcome people to help us as we get going on this countywide initiative.
If you report your invasives using iNaturalist, there are some that if the county sees it on property, school property, or in the woods, they are able to come and treat. Depends on the plant.
Well, yes, I mean, right. I should have addressed, I didn't address your specific question. Right, I would tell the school people and they can try and take care of it on their property anyway. And as for the nearby woods, it depends on who owns the woods.
We do have some questions now when you're ready.
Yes.
So from Rosemarie Linder, we have, can you share more information about conservation landscaping?
Yes. So the term is broad. Typically it's used for the example that I gave, where you take lawn and turn it into not lawn with native plants. And there are grants available for people or organizations who want to do that. And the grants come through the state, through the soil and water conservation districts for each area. There are some exceptions, like Arlington doesn't have a soil and conservation, water conservation. But you may be able to get a matching grant if you want to have your lawn have less lawn with native plants. There are plenty of other ways to capture stormwater. The other way to do it using native plants is to put in a rain garden, which is the same idea, except that you excavate much deeper and calculate it to literally capture all the runoff from your roof, for example. And then, of course, there are engineering solutions to runoff, but that doesn't come under conservation landscaping.
And then we have a question about how we talked about insects that relying on leaf litter, moth cocoons, fireflies, etc., but then talking about mowing at the end. Is there a best time to mow or mulch leaves, especially if you have a lot of oak leaves? We have an area of grass for our dogs. We also have lots of oaks. What is the timing if you must mulch leaves to not have a mat of leaves?
Well, ideally, you'd want to wait until everyone had a chance to pupate and hatch out from their eggs or whatever, and that wouldn't be until around now. That may not be a popular choice if you have oak leaves on your turf grass and you're trying to maintain the turf grass. So, you could try and put some of those leaves into your planting beds or under your trees. And the bigger the circle of protected ground under tree, the better, and the less grass under a tree, the better it is for the tree. So that's one place to consider. But other than that, we just end up killing the poor caterpillars when we do it. Maybe some of them survive. I don't know.
And then you mentioned winter salt getting in the water. Is there a kind of salt or ice melt that is okay, or do you suggest from using it entirely, or refrain from using it entirely?
You can get. I don't know how widely available this is in quantity. You can get beet juice products. I actually try. I've never used salt. The last winter, I had a particular reason why I needed it. And I was able to find online one that is basically, it was like a combination of beet juice and salt, but I know that they use beet juice. So you can probably find it. I was trying to find this like one day before I needed it. So I was in a hurry. How well it works and all those details, I don't know.
We just have a mention that instead of flowering trees, larger shrubs could be used when in reference to the first question, like witch hazel as an example.
Oh, yeah.
And then could you speak to obtaining grants to facilitate association budgets? Which grants are available?
Well, there are grants for trees. Virginia Department of Forestry, for instance, has grants for trees. And on the Plant Nova Natives and the Plant Nova Trees websites, we have two websites, but it's the same organization. There are references to those, and I'll send out a link to those grant opportunities. And then there's this conservation, the stormwater grants. Now, it's not like there's enough money for everybody, but it could be you. And there may well be you because a lot of people don't know about it. So it's worth applying for these grants.
And then I think the last question we have in the chat right now is, are there HOAs that have passed ordinances prohibiting spraying on private lawns?
I doubt that they would be legally able to, unless it's unless there's enabling stuff in their initial, what do you call it? Those initial documents that form a HOA. There are.
Your declarations and covenants.
Thank you. Yeah. So a lot of the time you're limited by that. Now, that could be a good thing if it's allowed landowners to plant non-flowering trees in their front lawn. But it's, a problem when you're trying to make things happen. You have to check on that. I am not aware of that, but there may be. I'm just not aware of it. It's a good idea if you can do it.
With regards to the spraying on private lawns, what about Virginia laws on drift?
Well, there are to maintain your applicator license, you have to prevent that. So it's not to say that the companies that come around and spray always stay away on windy days. You know, they have a schedule, and if the wind's blowing, they're tempted to go ahead anyway. But they would, no, if reported, they could lose their licenses for that. Okay, sounds like that may be everything. Any other thoughts, questions?
Can you address how to manage bamboo is taking over an area that our church, a property on my church?
Oh, sorry, big bucks.
Yeah, big bucks.
Yeah, it does seem that excavation is the usual approach. Although people have had, I gather, some luck by repeated cutting and painting, if they like drip a little herbicide into the center in the hollow space,
Mhm.
or just paint the stump, I'm not sure. A lot of work. And then, you know, if you do that, you like cut it and leave the stump and paint the stump, then you have like these daggers sticking out of the ground.
Yeah.
And then there's foliar spray.
Mhm.
All this costs money.
Yeah, it was like I got a quote for $4,000, and that probably really wasn't enough money to do it.
I was gonna say, that sounds low.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
that's what I'm thinking. Okay.
Is there a best practice related to the order in which you should address invasives on properties that may have multiple types of invasives?
Oh, yeah. And on our website, we have some suggestions for how to prioritize that. Like, so what we suggest is that you think about this as a long-term problem. If you don't get to it this year, okay. It's very good idea to come up with a management strategy for at least maybe the next 5 years. How are you going to do this? And, you know, I guess what I was, you know, year one, for example, to make sure that you've cut the vines on the trees, so at least the trees aren't dead, won't die. And if you have like just a little bit of lesser celandine, just as an example, get rid of that right away, because otherwise it'll cost you so much more if you let it go. And then year two, you might start to address the shrubs and et cetera, like that. And there are people who can help you figure that out, but we also have some suggestions on our website. Okay, well, I'm happy to give more talks if anyone wants to have their like, for instance, if you work for a property management company, I'd be happy to come to do a lunchtime webinar for your property management company, because it really is the professionals as well as the decision makers and like board member decision makers that we would love to reach. It's hard when you're only reaching individual homeowners. So let me know if I can help in any way. And also there, as I said, there's so much more you could say about any one of these topics. If you'd like to hear more or learn more one way or the other, happy to help. Kenneth?
Will this video, or whatever you want to call this recording, be available? And can you take what I'll call screenshots off of it if you want to present some of this information to your board of directors?
Yes, but easier than that. Also, I will send you a link to the slides themselves.
Thank you.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that we have mentioned here about looking at Blue Ridge Prism fact sheet on treatment for bamboo, and maybe getting a volunteer group like the Boy Scouts or something to help with labor.
I'll give a quick shout out to Blue Ridge Prism. They came out to Regency. I'm on the Regency board. And they came out and did a wonderful walk across our property, helped us identify our invasives and some of the new processes to take care of those invasives. We are very lucky. We have a couple of master gardeners that are in our community. So they've joined us on those walks. But a big shout out to Blue Ridge Prism. They were absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, wonderful organization. Leaders. Okay, very good. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you,